Lonely women make good lovers, sings the man on the country station. But that's not how I remember loneliness. Mostly too drunk to feel anyone's pleasure. And the next morning, that pitiful kinship of distance. Except for the night he couldn't finish it, not in the meadow, not in his truck. Until finally we stumbled through the blue light of his shared living room, because at the least he needed some place to put my hunger to bed. In the morning he thought to make the misadventure right, while I looked out the window, examining the scars on the glass. Bird shit, a feather, unbroken blue sky. The same way I look down at my hands now, everything so plain, even my pain, which I thought anyone could see. Thanks so much for being here tonight, y'all. It is this book birthday. So pub day, super exciting. As Tyler said, I'm Keetje Kuipers. I am a white woman with quite a lot of freckles, and short hair and green sparkly earrings to go with some of the green on this book cover. And I'm wearing a blazer and a t-shirt that you can't really read, but if you look on my Instagram page, you'll see that it says, "I'm gonna die lonely." It's my lonely t-shirt. Yeah, like I said, I'm super excited to be here and to get to read from this book for you guys. When I was writing the poems for this book, I was struggling with something that I had struggled with in my last book, which was that I kind of didn't know how to fit all the complicated pieces of my identity into the poems and into the manuscript. And I felt like, oh, how do I explain these things? How do I explain that I lived my life out of order, that I was a single mother by choice, and then I got married to a woman that I had loved in college, but I hadn't been with in 7 years, and I married a woman, but everyone else I've loved in my life has been a man. And these are all like really complicated identity things that don't fit into an easy box. And I felt frustrated because I felt like I needed to fit it into a box for my reader. And what I figured out, of course, is that that's totally not true. But what I needed was some magic in order to figure out how to write those poems. And I would say that almost all the poems in this book are love poems, and this one definitely is. The Magician at the Woodpile. The blue tarp is covered in little pools of water that shimmer like sequins everywhere a wrinkle has gathered. I pull it off with a flourish and start digging through the kindling and logs until I find the dicks. All of them hidden in the back of the pile. The dicks I took in my mouth, the dicks that didn't ask permission, the dicks I loved, and the dicks I never really knew. I remember holding them in my hands, how soft the skin, how various the shapes, and cooing to each one, "You're the most beautiful dick I've ever seen," as if wonder were the only register my voice could work in. Now I stack the wood the way the dicks must have learned at camp, with the kindling at the bottom and the big logs on top. I add the dicks last, like a little pink crown of thorns. Then I light the whole thing on fire. I expect to see spiders come running out, rats even. I expect to hear screams, but there's nothing. Just a fire making me warm, even as the sun goes down at my back. Everything but my face, suddenly in darkness, like I'm performing a magic trick like the magic trick is me. Hmm. Well, I picked more poems than we have time for, so I am narrowing things down here. Um, my wife, I like to tell my wife that this is the wife book, but she doesn't love hearing that because she takes a look at all the poems in the book where she supposedly appears and she's asleep in all of them. And so she can't figure out why I call it the wife book because she's not really an active participant in these poems. But I'm gonna read you guys one where she's awake. In the outdoor shower with my pregnant wife. The old frisbee from Burger Chef, once red but faded now, the pale pink of my wife's widening areolas, lies upturned beneath the saltwater drip of our sagging beach towels. This world is full of objects succumbing to the gentle ebb of decay. But her body, loosening breasts and blue-veined thighs caught in a cascade of wet light as she turns beneath the showerhead's senseless spray, is not one of them. That low blooming shudder and heft at her hips can't compare to her belly button skin, stretched taut and thin, become the pale sail of a boat screaming into harbor. I am here to praise the way in which everything I have ever loved about her body is about to be ruined forever in the breaking open. Tonight the wind will come up, turn the towels on the line into fat bells, turn the waves into a froth, drag the sand out and leave it where our toes can't touch. In the morning, the ocean will return to its languid sheet, but the beach will be strewn with the wreckage. I won already, the body scarred by stretch marks, the extra flap of skin to hang soft at her waist, the feet that will never again be quite so small. I want to worship the body after the storm, the one I'm imagining already as she unfolds the straps from her shoulders and peels the suit off, her skin covered in those minute and glittering fragments of shell some people insist on calling sand. I think when we live in times like these, and what times they are, um, it can feel like a poem can't do very much. And I certainly feel when I try to put pen to paper after listening to NPR in the morning while making my kids lunch that there is nothing my pen can do to stop the great machine of the world for even a moment. Um, but then sometimes I write a poem like this and it makes me feel differently. Bleeding. The world is trying to kill me. One news story, one sneeze, one bad president at a time. And maybe I don't care anymore if I'm dead. That's what I used to think when she put her fingers inside me. I don't care if I die. It felt so good. She loved my body when it stank, when I hadn't showered or brushed my teeth. She loved it in cheap hostels or in apartments haunted by a stranger's cigarette smoke. Beneath the pale, hushed sheets of her childhood bedroom, when I was ill, on drugs, the day after I'd gotten out of the hospital, and every week of every month for years, nothing stopping us. Her hands turned bright red with the blood of loving me. We'd put a towel down to sop up the mess, as if I'd died, as if she'd killed me. Our bodies collapsed on top of each other, just one more murder suicide. everything but the gun, the knife, the man to complete the scene. And here we still are, despite every loaded weapon, pulling a red scarf from between my legs, and me mumbling, I could die, but still, somehow alive. I said this book was love poems. Um, and they are love poems to my wife. They are love poems to old lovers, to old friends, um, to my family, but they're also love poems to the self and love poems to the world. And this poem is called Pregnant Girl Creek. There's a girl leaned back against the chains of the bridge, clutching her belly through the thin rayon of her dress like it's covering the underside of the sun, while her friend tells her to tilt her head right or left for the photos she's taking with a phone, each turn making a stripe of pink bangs flash across the girl's face like the fan of a bird's fragile wing. And what I mean is that she doesn't have much money, and also that I know her, which isn't possible since the girl I know is dead. Her children born and half grown already, nothing of her own shimmering left in this light-sieved moment, but the memory of her sweetness, which was true as this creek is cold, even at the end when she'd lost her kids and was ashamed of herself. And I think about how careless people like to say that it doesn't cost anything to be kind, but that some of us know the truth, which is that the price of cracking yourself open to the world long enough to feel love for a stranger, which is the same as feeling love for yourself, is dear, so that it hurts more than a little to lean in as I pass by and spend it all on this girl, telling her how pretty those pictures are going to be. I think I have time for two more. Um, and I'm going to read, um, actually, we'll do one more and then we'll save one for the end after Peter and I chat. So here's one last one before Peter skewers me with his piercing questions. All right. This poem is called The Rats, and my wife gets to be awake in this one too. They come home with our daughter because there's no one at school to feed them on the weekends. They are mates, and like all true companions, they are devoted and they bite. We set their cage on the kitchen table and wait for the weekend to end, for our girl to fall asleep so we can talk about God, while the rats lick the silver ball that delivers the water one drop at a time. There are so many points on which you and I disagree. The value of a clean counter, the purpose of parent-teacher conferences, what warrants a good cry, or calling you a name so cruel I make myself whisper it through my teeth. God is the least of it. When I think I'm so angry I could hit you in the face, you turn yours to me with a look of disbelief. The rats, meanwhile, have turned up the volume. Tick, tick, says the silver ball as their teeth click against it, thirsty as ever, thirstier still at night when the darkness wakes them. And during the day, when they're curled together in their flannel hammock, head to tail, two furry apostrophes possessing nothing but each other, paws pressed together as if in prayer, to what gods do they prostrate themselves then? God of fidelity? God of forgiveness? I lied when I said I didn't believe? Who, even me, the coldest of heart, could turn away from a sea parted, bread that multiplies to answer need, water transformed to the sweetest wine, the kind that tastes better for each year it's been left in the barrel. Thanks for listening. All right, Peter, I'm ready for you. Hit me.
Good God. Hello. Sorry, I just clicked on video and audio like 15 times. I was skewered by my own computer. Thank you so much, Katja. As you know, it's such a treat to listen to you read always. And I got to tell people that this is your fourth book, and all have been with BOA. So, and I've been at BOA for 22 years. So I have been rocking with you for 15 years through all these different books. And I mean, I'm always just amazed at hearing you read. And, you're a poet who, when you do speak your poems, they connect so well with what's on the page. I don't know how to describe it, but everything on the page is fully realized already. And then there's this whole other dimension that comes into play as well. So thank you for sharing those with us. And so just to give people a little, I just gave them a quick history, but BOA's first book was Beautiful in the Mouth. It was selected by Thomas Lux as winner of our Pool and Prize contest, which is for first books. And then we had The Keys to the Jail. I also wanted to show off your covers. I don't know if they'll show up too well here. Maybe not. But anyway, Keys to the Jail, they're all cool covers too. And then All Its Charms. And now we are at Lonely Women Make Good Lovers. And so I guess one of my questions I wanted to talk about, or a couple of things I wanted to talk about, was just the idea of moving through time, moving through books, moving through a career in this way. And I guess, what are the differences, let's say, between this book and, let's say, Beautiful in the Mouth, just because that was the first one. So what are the differences that we might find between those two books?
Yeah, well, I think actually this book, um, Lonely Women was kind of my attempt to get back to that first book. There's something about a first book, it's free, right? You don't know yet that there are a whole bunch of rules that you're not supposed to break, and there's so much play involved because it's your first go round. And I think, in some way the stakes are high with a first book. It's your first stamp on the world that you're putting out there. But in other ways, you haven't really set the bar for yourself yet, right? And so with my first book, I look back at those poems and I feel like, oh, they're free, they have a wildness to them. They're really embodied, they're really, really in the body. And I love that about that book. And so in my second book, I wrote my second book when I was a Stegner Fellow. And Peter, you've heard me talk about this before, but I was really in my head then. And I felt like I had to change what I was doing, and I felt like I couldn't be so embodied anymore. And now I needed to like get serious. And there are lots of poems in that book that I love, but then there are also poems in that book that I struggle with because I watched myself sort of walk away from what was at the core of my work. And I remember when I sent you this manuscript and you wrote me back and you said it's classic Kuipers.
With two Ks,
Two
classic.
Ks, exactly. Classic Kuipers. And I was like, yes, he gets it. He sees what I see, he sees what I was going for. And that was to get back to the wildness and to get back to the body. So I actually think this book is my first book in a while that feels so close to the kind of writing that I was doing when I wasn't afraid of what anybody would think of my poems, when I just needed to write them.
And all the elements that you described too, it's really interesting. They all make their way into this book, but I guess there's maybe just a comfort level, with you as a human, you not just as a poet, but just like all of these things have sunk in. And so there is the bodiness. There is the environmentalism, the outdoors, the relationships, the sex, the late nights, but there's also the motherhood, which was new
Yeah.
since the first book,
Yeah.
and it's all feels very comfortable together, and I think maybe for me as a reader, it's been cool to go through these different stages, and I see, yeah, I just there's a comfort of this and a mastery of not just the content but the form.
Mm, mhm, mhm. Yeah.
Does that sort of reflect maybe some of how you might feel about, let's talk about the writing itself and the poems,
Yeah. Yeah, I think um, you know, after I love revision and I'm big into revision and I did a ton of revision on the poems in all four of my books. But I think that one thing that started to happen after my first book was that I started to become sort of obsessed with polishing everything to this really perfect shine. And
Mm,
some of that had to do with form. I love a sonnet. It's very satisfying for me to make all the pieces fit together so perfectly, like a little rhetorical puzzle. And I do love rhetoric in a poem. I do love thinking about how an argument unfolds through image, through metaphor, through shifts in tone. But I realized that I was getting to a point where yeah, where I was making poems that were so polished, they were so smooth that you couldn't really feel anything when you ran your fingers over them. And I want people to really feel stuff when they encounter my poems. I want them to feel textures. I want there to be surprise. And I also really want there to be discomfort. So, what I found when I was working on the poems for this book, when I was writing them and when I was revising them, was that I not only wanted to leave in those, I think of them as rumble strips, like when you're driving through a parking lot,
mm,
you hit the rumble strips, right? Like sort of keep you in your lane or, tell you to slow down. Like I wanted to keep the rumble strips in the poem. I wanted to jar readers. I wanted to wake them up. But I needed to think about doing that in a way that still felt artful to me and intentional instead of just, oh, here's a weird image that happened in a first draft. I'll just leave it in there because it's strange. No, I wanted to make sure that I was leaving it in there in a purposeful way, or that I was changing and augmenting it in a purposeful way. I'm also pretty obsessed with making sure that everything in a poem points toward what is at the heart of the poem. So whatever argument the poem is making, if it's making an argument for hopelessness, if it's making an argument for redemption, whatever emotional argument that it's making, whatever abstract concept it's really digging down into at its core, I want every image, every verb, every adjective, to point towards that. But that doesn't mean writing a poem that has like some umbrella metaphor, like here the metaphor is the ocean and everything in the poem will be starfish and shells. No, 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 no. Jack Gilbert has a poem. It's a love poem. I'm forgetting the name of it, but in the middle there of the poem, suddenly these raccoons appear and they're licking the inside of a garbage can, and you're like, yes. That is love. The raccoons licking the inside of the garbage can. And we're not prepared for that image in the poem. It's not like it goes with what he was doing imagistically before that. So it jars us, but it's also absolutely points to the very center of the poem. So I wanted to pay attention to how I could use moments of tonal shift or imagistic shift, um, to the shifts of syntax, the shifts of rhythm, in order to discomfort the reader a little bit, but still make sure the poem was pointing exactly at its own heart.
beautiful, beautifully said. There's a lot to unpack there. I'm gonna go back and listen to all of that. And one of the things that really just stood out to me, I'd never heard that rumble strip idea, but I think one of the things I love about your work and what that really tunes me into is that it forces the reader to be present in the moment. And you mentioned, the politics and can poems make a difference and all these things. I think we get pulled into this ether of worry and, and these news cycles and all these different things. And I think just the act of creating a way for a reader to be present in the moment is in itself a political act. And
Yeah.
so those rumble strips, those forcing us to be, in that moment, are extremely powerful and extremely poignant and important. I think important, and that's, let's expand it to poetry in general right now.
Yeah.
It's really important to have those moments of just presence.
Absolutely. It's really hard. I mean, it's really easy to not be alive to the world. And I think you're right. Poems and particular moments in poems can force us to be alive to the world, whether the poem is political or not. It makes us look at ourselves and it makes us look at everyone that we're in relation to, who we move past when we walk down the street, who lives on the other side of the world from us, but we're in relation to. So, yeah, I love thinking about it that way.
I mean, since we've stumbled into this area, let's talk just a little bit about, I'm interested in your view of the role of politics and poetry, or any sort of, I hate to use the word responsibility, but do we have a responsibility as poets, as publishers, as literary people, to comment on the world in general, what's going on politically, or is that?
Well, I think I'm coming back to that phrase, being alive to the world. And I'm thinking about, so as editor-in-chief of Poetry Northwest, I read thousands of poems every year. And when I stepped into that role, I knew what I didn't want to publish. And what I didn't want to publish were poems that were like deep thoughts on a rainy day while I drink a cup of tea. I wanted poems that felt like they were shaking themselves up. And again, I want to come back to that idea of discomfort and being uncomfortable. I think that is one of the jobs of poetry, right? Is to make ourselves uncomfortable when we write it and to make ourselves uncomfortable when we read it. So instead of thinking of poetry as like having a responsibility to be political, to speak to the moment, instead, I think poetry has a responsibility to be engaged with the world, to make us alive to the world, and to make us uncomfortable in the world. We should be uncomfortable. There is no reason for us to move through the world with comfort. Not right now, but really not ever, right? When there is so much injustice and so much inequality in the world, we should always be uncomfortable, right? And that doesn't mean that we can't feel joy in our lives and in poems, but those things have to be together. I think right now we're having many kinds of cultural moments, but I think one of the cultural moments that we're having maybe in the literary world and in general is, we're desperate to to feel good sometimes, right? And we want to feel gratitude. We're getting messages about being grateful. We want to feel joy. We want to feel wonder. Like these are all things that we want. But I find that I feel those things more when I'm not looking for them in their purest, most saccharine form. I feel them more intensely and more truly when I see a pregnant young woman who reminds me of my cousin who died as a result of the opioid epidemic, right? And her substance abuse problems that went on for years, and I feel the intense pain of her loss and of the loss of her life, but I also feel the incredible joy and hope of this other young woman who is not my cousin, right? Who is someone who has so much to look forward to and so much to feel happy and feel good about. And I feel incredible joy in being able again to be in relation with her, with this person who I don't know, who I can only know so much, the same way that I can only know myself so much. So I think that's when I think about what poetry owes us, that's where I go.
Yeah, beautiful. I love, there's some phenomenal blurbs on the back of the book that I think do a great job of expressing what's in it. And I wanted to share one line from Stephanie Burt's blurb, and hopefully we can discuss it and unpack it a little bit. But Stephanie says, what does a grown-up, clear, thoughtful, emotionally available, gifted lesbian poet get when, decades after Adrienne Rich, she comes up still wearing her tanks and takes her mask off after the proverbial wreck and makes a quote, a pact with the world, with their earth and air? And I just love what's going on in there. And I'm wondering if you could unpack some of what you think Stephanie is referring to in that blurb.
Yeah. There were a lot of things that surprised me about that blurb, kind of stunned me. In fact, I mean, being compared to Adrian Rich is wow. Um, Adrienne Rich and Marilyn Hacker were two of, and Marilyn Hacker is also blurbed this book, and so to have those two iconic lesbian poets as sort of like presences on the back of this book means a lot to me, and as I said, stuns me. But they were two of the most important poets that I first encountered as a young person beginning to write poems. Um, and and they're two of the most political poets too, who I encountered early on. Um, Political and deeply committed to being in relation with others and with the world. So I think they set me on a path that I wasn't so aware of at the time, but that I can see now as being about um, yeah, coming up from that wreck. I think the other thing that stunned me about Steph's blurb is that she called me emotionally available. And I think the speaker in my poems is, I don't know if I am. I don't know if my wife would say that I'm emotionally available. I would say I'm working on that. But my speaker is definitely trying to, right? My speaker wants that more than anything else, right? To be connected, and I think that's the other thing that poems do, right? That's why we write them. If we didn't publish them, if they just stayed in our diaries, they'd just be for us, but we put them out in the world because we want so desperately to touch and be touched by others. Um, so those are the things that that blurb makes me think of.
And another thing that Bert alludes to is the earth and air. You've always, right from the first book, been very connected to the environment, and I know you do a ton of outdoor activities and hobbies, and you live outdoors very much. You live in Missoula, Montana, first of all, which to a kid from Rochester, New York, sounds extremely exotic and outdoorsy. And you're at the foot of the Rattlesnake Wilderness, which again, like I don't know what that even means, but it sounds intense. So, what role does the environment and your interactions with the earth play in your writing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you walk down my street, and I live in a residential neighborhood, but it's that urban wildland interface, right? It's right there at the edge. And so you walk down to the end of the street, and that is the beginning of the Rattlesnake Wilderness area. And there's a trailhead right there, and it goes up and it hooks up with the Mission Mountains, and those head north, and you hit Glacier National Park, and then Canada. So it's a pretty incredible gateway. My during certain seasons, like especially in the fall, but also in the spring, we get text alerts almost every day from my kids' school saying, you know, don't let your kids walk to the bus stop alone. There are bears at these three bus stops, or you know, there are mountain lions that were spotted, you know, in this neighborhood, right? So it is a wild place, and again, it's a place where that can sometimes be exciting and sometimes be uncomfortable, but it is a rubbing against and a rubbing up against, which I love. I love being forced to be with and in the world in that way. Yeah, so much of my work has been engaged with place and continues to be. And you know, I did that residency, the Marjorie Davis Boyden Wilderness Writing Residency, and that's where I finished my first book. And so a lot of the poems in that book are really about or take place in a landscape where there just aren't a lot of people, right? I was 2 hours down a dirt road from the nearest town, totally off the grid. My life now is very much on the grid. In the summer, we get off grid a lot, but even though that's the case, I think that, I mean, this is true for anybody right now. You know, we're all touched by wildfire. We're all touched by flood. We're all touched by, you know, quote unquote, natural disasters. There's something about living in the Mountain West, though, that makes me feel that we're just a little bit closer to the bone. And so it's kind of inescapable for that to get into my writing. Um, I can tell you that the poems that I'm working on now, that's where they're coming from. But I'm really I feel sort of frustrated by where ecopoetics has left us at this moment in time, especially in terms of, writing into the Anthropocene. And I I have had the privilege of working with some really great students, and I'm thinking of one right now who did a fantastic project where she wrote poems that matched up with the initiatives in Project Drawdown, which are a bunch of different suggestions for how you can have a positive environmental impact in your daily life, and how it's really quite achievable for us each to commit to and take part in these small acts that do have a big impact. And I loved the way that her poems, they weren't sort of frivolously positive, but instead were very grounded, and they were
Mm.
action oriented, and they just felt like they were really happening. They weren't mourning, they weren't grieving. And there's a place for mourning and there's a place for grief in what's happening to our planet right now. But I think for me personally, that's not so much what I'm interested in writing into. I'm interested in writing into the Anthropocene with a vision that is less clouded by tears, which is, I feel a lot of tears, but that's not what I want my poems to do when they're engaging with that. I want my poems um, to be, this is going to sound so weird. I want them to be at peace with the Anthropocene in a way that feels clear-eyed and present. I want my poems to be present. And sure, there might be some anger, there might be some grief, but mostly I want my poems to sit with it. So that's what I'm trying to do now as a writer of the wild and natural world.
And you're saying that's the direction that you're working on poems now that yeah have a lot of that sensibility. So I'm curious. This of the four books, I got to say, this is my favorite title. Lonely Women Make Good Lovers. It's a phenomenal title, and so I'm curious at what point you knew that this would be the title. And also, for those who don't know, this is also the title of a song that came out in 1972. I guess a country song, really is.
Mhm.
And so, do you also have a connection to the song as well?
Yeah, I love listening to country music, especially on the radio. And there are a lot of stations here in Montana where you can hear that kind of sound. But one of them is the Ranch, and it's a little more classic country. And my daughter and I love listening to the Ranch. My wife and I love it. And one day this song came on, and I thought, oh, sort of charming. And I was listening to it, and really, it's not very charming. It is exactly what you mentioned, which is like, oh, women, when they're lonely, you could just get them drunk, and they will be so grateful and glad to sleep with you. Um, and it made me feel so sad for the women in this song, and it also made me think about the times that I have been lonely, and how that didn't quite gratitude wasn't what I was feeling. And I wasn't sort of like driven to, my highest points of passion when I was lonely either. So that was where that poem came from. I felt like I needed to write against that song or write back to that song. Um, and then when I was thinking about the title for the collection, I was thinking, oh, I could call it Good Lovers. There are a lot of lovers in this book. I could call it Lonely Women. There are a lot of lonely women in this book. But I happened to be at a residency. I was at the T.S. Eliot House in Gloucester, Mass. And I was there with my friend Esther Lynn, who is also finishing up her first book, Cold Thief, which is out now too, and is fantastic. And we were talking about poems and manuscripts, and I was telling her about the ideas for the title for this book, and she said, no, you got to go all the way. You got to like go big, whole song title. And I think she was absolutely right. And I'm also pretty happy with it.
And the last question I'll ask, and if anyone wants to slip in a question after this, feel free. But a big difference, as we discussed, between this and your first book is that you're a mom now. And so, and I believe two times over, right? You have two
Mhm,
kids.
mhm.
So I'm curious about the how much you share with your kids, whether it's the process, do they experience you as a poet? How do they experience you as a poet? And also the work itself, sharing it with
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't share my work with my family, with my kids or my wife before it comes out in a book. And I'm not keeping it from them, but I also have such a huge community of writers that I don't need my family to be that for me. And they're really proud of me and they're psyched for me and they understand the demands of my work and are really supportive of all the work that I do, and are very understanding when I come into the house at the end of the day for dinner and I'm super crabby and stressed out about all the work that I do. But I don't share that work with them until it comes out in a book. And my daughter, she figured out that the Easter Bunny wasn't real because she read a poem in my last book where I talk about a gift that I bought for her, and she was like, "Wait, the Easter Bunny brought that gift." And she was like, "Wait a minute, Mom is the Easter Bunny." So, this book, she's not going to learn anything about the Easter Bunny in this one. She's going to learn a lot of other things, though. And, I do love taking my family to events that I do. And I had a big book launch for this book on Friday here in Missoula with cupcakes and champagne and pole dancers, and that was excellent. But I did not have my kids come to this event. And my daughter has already read some of the poems in this book, and I know she'll read all of them, but I don't know that she needs to see me perform them just yet. So this is kind of a different experience to have this book come out with kids in a family. I've never felt nervous or self-conscious before about that, but I do now. And I also do because of social media, and I share my work online, and I want to make sure that my daughter's friends aren't thinking about the poems that I write when I drive, swim, carpool. But like I said, they're all really proud of me. When my son first saw copies of Lonely Women Make Good Lovers and he saw my picture on the back, he was like, "Mommy, you write this book?" And he was so excited, and he had to go and get paper and pens and make his own book too, because he wanted to be like mommy and have a book. So I love that they get to see me jet set around and give readings and be really driven by the demands of my writing and my editorial work and all of that. I feel really proud that I'm showing my kids how a woman can be driven by so many of the passions in her life. But this book is going to be an interesting one to share with them, and there will be levels to that sharing for sure.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. And congratulations. This is the pub day for Lonely Women Make Good Lovers, which is his newest book. So I'm so pleased that Boa could publish it and bring it out into the world with you. And if you wouldn't mind leaving us with a poem, we would really appreciate it. I'm going to sign off. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, Peter mentioned that Steph Burt quote, and she talks about making a pact with the world and with the earth and the air. And there's a poem in particular that she's referring to, and it's the last poem in the book, which I'm going to read for you guys now. Thanks so much for being here tonight. Now that we've been married all these years, tiny prop planes drag banners against the sky, selling us things we already have, and whatever else crosses the landscape: smoking engine of the trawler, polka-dotted lanternfly, tendril of melted ice cream, snail sticking your wrists, golden expanse, is just one more thing I don't have a choice about loving. I know there was a time before I met you, but that fact is like knowing that the length of my veins could wrap around the earth 4 times, or that each year on Saturn it rains 10 million tons of diamonds. Imaginable, but just barely. because love before your arrival had been an idiopathic thing, pain without a diagnosable source, a sensation that divided me from the people I loved because I was the only one who could feel it. When some people get married, they're making a pact with another person. When I married you, I made a pact with the world. I live in it now and refuse myself nothing.